Welcome to the first of two Legacy Warriors podcasts this week. The first one, we're going to be focusing on Legacy Fighting Alliance 212, which goes down in Brazil and features an interim flyweight title in the main event, as current interim flyweight champion Marcos Degli takes on Matthias Severino. Very fun matchup there. Degli was scheduled to fight a very high-level Peruvian fighter who is actually a champion over there at FFC, which is another Fight Pass promotion. Unfortunately, Oscar Miguel pulls out, and in steps Matthias Severino, who is still a very tough test for Marcos Degli. Now, reminder, the actual champion here, the undisputed, well, I guess it is disputed if there is a interim champion, but the actual LFA flyweight champion is actually Eduardo Chapolin, who's on the current season of The Ultimate Fighter. And seeing as he lost his first round matchup, I'm assuming he's going to come back to the LFA after the show wraps up, and he will look to defend his title, maybe even trying to unify it against the winner of this weekend's matchup, unless one of those guys gets a call to the Contender series. Decent card all around. I think there's 14 fights all in all. There's also a former UFC fighter here in Claudio Ribeiro who's making his I don't know if it was his return to the LFA, but return to the regional scene, going up against Diego Diaz, who's riding a solid 6-fight winning streak. So I'm going to go through these matchups pretty briefly with you guys. Going to be referring to my notes a lot. Again, it's kind of hard to stay on top of who everybody is, especially after, researching them all, and they all kind of get jumbled up in my head. So I apologize if I continue to look down at my laptop for those notes, but I do also quickly want to mention the background is pretty much up. There are a few little things that I want to touch up on. Obviously, you guys can see a little bit of a crack up there. I'm going to have to fill that in and figure that thing out. The lighting and the blinds are the last things that I need in. So I'm still using natural sunlight from the giant window that's right across from me. But once I get the blinds in, either by the ending of this week or early next week, everything should slowly start to come together, and I can actually use my studio lights. So everything looks a little bit more lit up and looks a little bit more professional. So a little bit of an update on the studio for you guys. At least for the most part, it's starting to look better. It does not look like I'm in a prison cell, which was what the case has been for the last 2.5 months. But we're getting there, folks. All right. Let's get into this LFA card. Reminder, I do have track plays on the Lock of the Night Patreon page for this card. If you're unable to figure out who I'm taking, check out the Lock of the Night Patreon page. You can find my track plays there. I am waiting for limits to open up on a few spots, so I'll wait until fight day to drop those plays for you guys, but I already have a few locked in for this card, so make sure you guys check that out. All right. Let's get right into this. First matchup up, we got Julius Barros coming in at -300 going up against Radija Aquino, who comes in at +240. There's no tape on Aquino, who is 0-1 as a pro. She had her pro debut back in December, where she ended up going to a draw against a 3-5 opponent. Can't really figure out what she's good at, what she brings to the table. So this matchup is a straight up pass, even though it seems like the LFA is propping up Julia Barros to get this win here. She's a BJJ brown belt, often competing in grappling matchups, and I'm expecting her to take this fight to the ground as soon as possible and eventually find a submission or even grind it out. But we have no idea what to expect from Aquino, so I would suggest to pass rather than take the chalk. All right, squash match here, and I'm kind of surprised we're only getting -800 on Romana Toscanelli, who comes in at -800, and she's going up against Carol Silva. Carol Silva has not competed in 7.5 years. She's going to be very outmatched here from the physical aspect to just the overall skill set. I think Toscanelli is being propped up to get an easy win here. I think she utilizes her physicality, drags Silva to the ground, and I think she finds a finish within a round and a half. And this is the limit of what I would parlay somebody at, but I feel like there is enough of an advantage here for Toscanelli to parlay her in certain other spots throughout the card or on other events that are going down this weekend. All right, fun fight here. I believe in the flyweight division, we got Neto Pinheiro coming in at -200 going up against Claudio Meireles, who comes in at +160. Now, Pinheiro is a BJJ black belt who brings in a 3-0 undefeated record. He's finished all of his opponents, 2 of them by submission, 1 of them by TKO. TKO. Very good in terms of grabbing opponents and dragging them to the ground, although he hasn't really faced the toughest of opposition. And we've seen in his one amateur fight that went into deep water, he started to slow down and actually got TKO'd by his opponent. Meireles looks to be a solid prospect, only 20 years old, very well-rounded, has a very good Muay Thai game where he utilizes a ton of elbows and knees. He's training alongside Beatrice Consuli, who will also be fighting later on this card as a minus 2,500 favorite, and he seems to be very well-rounded. I think this is a fight where he could actually stop the takedowns and physical approach of Pinheiro and really pick him apart on the feet. I've seen some good defensive work from him in the past, and I think Pinheiro will obviously be the toughest BJJ black belt he's faced, but I think he'll be more than ready for this spot, and I think he could actually defend most of Pinheiro's early onslaught and then really start to pour it on in the second and third rounds as he forces Pinheiro to strike with him, and at plus 160, I'm more than happy to take a shot there. All right, next up, we got Aristides Vinicius coming in at minus 125, going up against Jonathan Cordeiro, who comes in at minus 105. Vinicius was largely stifled by Luan Pedroso back in March in his LFA debut, causing him to lose that first matchup. Vinicius had some solid success at the beginning of the second round with his grappling, but quickly got that position reversed and was pretty much at the whim of whatever Pedroso wanted to throw at him that night. His striking is nothing special. It's all about the ground game for him, but even there, he's not anything that jumps off the page. Cordeiro looks like a very slick striker. He does a great job in terms of putting combinations together and really walking opponents down and landing with solid emphasis as well. He has a 4-fight winning streak, with his last loss coming actually under the LFA banner to Gabriel Braga, who's obviously a standout PFL fighter at this point. He's finished 7 of his 8 opponents by knockout, and that's what he wants to bring to the table here against the grappler Vinicius. I think Cordeiro has shown decent enough grappling defense from what I've seen thus far, and I think that will allow him to keep this fight in the striking realm and really pummel Vinicius on the feet, leading to Cordeiro knocking him out within 2 rounds. Next up, we got Gabriel Vinicius coming in at minus 200, going up against Lucas Tenorio, who comes in at plus 160. Vinicius is a training partner of Diego Diaz, who co-mains this card against Claudio Ribeiro, and Vinicius brings a 4-0 undefeated record to the table. This guy's an absolute berserker who has finished 3 of his 4 opponents, and that one fight, he nearly finished his opponent in the first round, but luckily did not completely gas himself out, that he could still go the 15 minutes if he needs to, or if he needed to, and still pick up the victory that night. He's explosive, he's physical, he's strong, and very powerful as well when it comes to landing with emphasis on his opponents. Tenorio is a 4-0 prospect who's making his return to the mixed martial arts world after a 2.5-year-long layoff. He's a BJJ purple belt with a Muay Thai background, but I am not impressed with what I've been seeing on the regional scene from him. He's been put in bad positions and held in bad positions as well, but he still managed to get out of those spots and keep this undefeated record intact. But it feels like Vinicius is the one that the LFA is backing here to go out there and get an emphatic victory, and I think that he can utilize his athleticism advantage, his power, his speed, and all of that to really put it on Tenorio, and I think that could lead to a finish coming on the mat here for Vinicius, and at minus 200, I think that's a steal of a line. All right, next up, we got Beatrice Consuli coming in at minus 2,500, going up against Naini Silva, who comes in at plus 1,200. This is a squash match, but we do not parlay minus 2,000 favorites. Minus 800 is normally the limit of what I would pay, and if that's where Consuli was, I'd probably take her there, but this is an easy spot for Consuli to go out there and squash Silva and beat her within a round and a half. All right. Next up, we got Lucas Gouveia coming in at plus 275, going up against Luis Felipe Herculano, who comes in at minus 350. Now, both these guys are pretty similar in the fact that they like to utilize a Muay Thai heavy approach, but also has some decent grappling as well. But I think the odds indicate that Herculano is far superior to Gouveia, and I have to agree with them. Not so much to the point that I feel super comfortable taking that minus 350 shot on Herculano, but I feel like this is still a spot he can go out there and dominate Gouveia, utilizing his physicality, taking command of the cage, walking him down, and I think he can outwork Gouveia either en route to a decision win, or he goes out there and just dominates him on the mat and finds a finish there. But I do like Herculano to get the job done. All right. Intriguing matchup here that has me scratching my head between Marcio Cabral, who comes in at minus 115, and you're getting a pick'em price as well as on Maelton Azevedo. Cabral is a product of the Bonfim brothers, but this will only be his third fight since mid-2019. He makes his LFA debut with the September victory over a 6-5 opponent. Looks physical, looks athletic, looks to have some strength about him, but I just don't understand why he's been as inactive as he has. Outside of his physicality and the fact that he trains alongside high-level training partners, there's nothing that really jumps off the page, but that could be enough for him to go out there and overwhelm a guy like Azevedo, who's a little bit of a brawler, but has some clear flaws in his game that if Cabral is any good, he might be able to take advantage of here. Azevedo did come up short in his first LFA fight 3 years ago at the hands of eventual UFC signee Bruno Lopez, but he did manage to bounce back with victories in September and February, finishing both of those opponents. His grappling skills are improving ever so slightly, but that's where opponents have been able to take advantage of him in the past, even in fights where he ends up winning. His last fight, he pulled off a nasty scarfold Kimura arm lock to get the tap from his opponents and actually win the FFC title that night, but just a little bit lackluster in terms of the defensive aspect of his game. The big question mark and why I probably won't end up playing this matchup is the commitment to the MMA game from Cabral. Technically speaking, he could be superior to Azevedo, but Azevedo looks like a guy that really wants to, bite down on the mouthpiece and really put it on his opponents as well, and that could be enough for him to get his hand raised here as well. But I'm going to go with the promise that Cabral might be able to show here, and I think if he can put it together, technically speaking, maybe land a few takedowns, he could grind this fight out, but there are just too many question marks on the Cabral side for me to have any spot where I really want to plant my flag and pick a side here, but I will go Cabral as my prediction with very low confidence. All right, next up, we got Samuel Diaz coming in at minus 240, going up against Giuliano Prescendo, who comes in at plus 190. Now, Diaz is a finisher, and he has managed to go out there and get 10 first-round finishes in all 10 of his wins. He is a BJJ brown belt, but also has some nasty power in his strikes, hence why half of his wins are by submission and half of them are by knockout. He does a great job in terms of taking command of the cage from jump, and that usually allows him to get fights into a place where he feels most comfortable, and that's why he's been able to finish all of his opponents in that first round, or at least all the opponents that he's defeated thus far. He's going up against Prescendo, who's was holding his own against a 4-0 undefeated fighter in Nikita Kolshin back in November of 2023, but he did manage to bounce back in September with a victory in just under 2 minutes over an aging veteran. Seems to be a decent all-around fighter, a guy that may be tough to put away for certain guys, but I think Diaz has him covered in terms of from the physical point of view, but also from that just aggressiveness from jump, and I think that could catch Prescendo off guard. Not saying that Prescendo is not anticipating that, but I just don't think he'll have what it takes from a defensive perspective to deal with what Diaz is throwing at him. But even with that said, if Diaz is unable to get the job done early here, Prescendo might have the capabilities of taking over late and really causing Diaz problems down the stretch. I'm going to pick Diaz to win. I think he continues his trend of early finishes, but at minus 240, it's just a little too wide for me for a guy that's so keen on those early stoppages. All right. Next up, we got Joao Pedro Moreira coming in at minus 365, going up against Leonardo Cerboni, who comes in at plus 290. Now, Moreira is another guy that loves to get his finishes quickly, with 7 of his wins all coming in the first round. His lone defeat came to an LFA standout who is currently 9-0, but that was even a matchup where Mejia nearly finished him at the ending of that first round and then ended up giving up the finish in the second round to, I believe his name was Juan Pablo Vieira. Mejia is also a Bonfim Brothers prospect, similar to somebody else that I was speaking about earlier on the card. Both guys looking to peak this weekend alongside Gabriel Bonfim, who co-main events the UFC Nashville card. Mejia is very aggressive from jump, does a great job in terms of utilizing a lot of movement and then blitzing into big power shots. Has some decent groundwork as well if he can get the fight there. He's fun. He's impressive to watch. Now he's going up against Cerboni, who comes in with a 6-1 record. He's finished only his first and last pro wins. His lone defeat came by split decision in a fight that was pretty much a standing affair the entire time. Both guys throwing relatively the same amount of volume at each other, and it was pretty much a coin flip once it hit the scorecards there. Hence the split decision loss. He's long, lanky, seems to be a decent all-around fighter, but I think he's going to really crumble under the LFA lights here against a guy in Mejia who will not allow him any moment to really settle or try to get into his groove and wipe off that rust of like fighting for these smaller promotions and now coming into the LFA. With that said, minus 365 is still a little bit wide for me. The under 1.5 would be what I would target if you're looking to back Mejia here, because if he wins, probably comes early, probably comes with him squashing Cerboni sooner than later. But minus 365, a little bit wide when we still have question marks about what his cardio will look like in deeper water. But I'll still go Mejia and Mejia in round one. All right, next up, we got Daniel Araujo coming in at minus 725, going up against Thomas Bryan, who comes in at plus 525. Now, I got to give Araujo a lot of credit last time around because he came in as a big underdog against Azizbek Temirov, who is the brother of UFC flyweight Ramazan Temirov. And they fight the same. You know, Temirov utilizes a lot of explosivity, a lot of power, likes to command the cage and move forward, but Araujo leaned on his boxing background to really chip away at Temirov from distance, utilizing a consistent jab, but also nasty counter combinations to really hurt Temirov whenever Temirov entered that pocket. And I think that goes to show how good Araujo could actually be. And if his defensive grappling continues to hold up the way it has as of late, this is a perfect spot for him to go out there and showcase his dominance once again. Now, Bryan lost his first pro fight back in February of 2019. That was his pro MMA debut. He won 7 straight fights, but now finds himself on a 2-fight losing streak. And he's a guy that's very aggressive with his BJJ, but doesn't have the greatest takedown game, which often forces him to strike with his opponents. And then from there, he often finds himself behind, especially if his opponents are superior strikers. And that's exactly what he's facing this weekend. And Daniel Araujo, who's going to be able to force him to strike. And I think it's just a matter of time before Araujo ends up finding that knockout and putting Bryan out within 2 rounds. And I think that's why we're seeing the under 2.5 as chalky as it is. Last time I checked, it was minus 210, and I wouldn't be surprised to see that line continue to climb as there is that big of a skill discrepancy, especially in the striking realm between Araujo and Bryan. And I'm going to take Araujo to win this matchup. Minus 725, a little wide, especially when Bryan is clearly the better grappling specialist, but I think he's going to very much struggle to get this fight to the ground, which will lead to Araujo knocking him out. All right. Next up, we got Marina Monteiro coming in at minus 450, going up against Noira Ferreira, who comes in at plus 350. Now, Monteiro was able to pull off an upset in her LFA debut back in October, where she was able to finish Kendra McIntyre in the second round of their matchup. She was dealing with a lot of grapple-heavy approach from McIntyre in that first round, but Monteiro kept her wits about her, kept her confidence high. And then in that second round, we saw her really start to break McIntyre, really damage the face. And you can see clear optically all the damage that was accruing on McIntyre's face. And Monteiro could sense that she was really starting to take over, and she was able to put together a barrage of shots to get that standing TKO victory. There are still a lot of holes in Monteiro's game. She's very physical. She's a fighter. She likes to move forward. She doesn't mind eating a shot or two, and that's enough to get her those early wins in her professional MMA career. She's trained alongside some UFC and PFL veterans. But there are still some technical aspects of her game that she really needs to round out before she hopes to get either to the Contender Series or to the next level in the mixed martial arts game. Luckily for her, I think she's going up against a beatable opponent here, Noira Ferreira. Her only 2 losses have come to undefeated prospects, similar to what she's fighting this weekend. She's a decent all-around fighter, but she can be outstruck. She can be out-grappled. She's a BJJ purple belt, and that could be what she might try to lean on here against Monteiro, considering what we saw McIntyre successful with in the first round of their matchup. I still think that Monteiro is going to be a little bit too physical for Ferreira. I think that will allow her to keep this fight in a position she feels most comfortable. The one thing that gives me a little bit of pause is that Ferreira has not been finished by the 2 opponents that she lost to, who are very high-level fighters as well. And if Monteiro can't get her out of there, if this fight goes 15 minutes, maybe Ferreira is a little bit more successful than plus 350 indicates. That's not enough for me to jump on that plus money line here. I'm still going to take Monteiro to win this matchup. I think she just ends up landing more big shots, and I think she might be able to find that finish similar to what she was able to do against McIntyre, just putting together a barrage of shots, maybe not dropping and finishing Ferreira, but just overwhelming her and force a referee to step in and stop the fight. But minus 450 is a little wide for somebody that is still so raw in their mixed martial arts game. All right. Co-main event now, where we got Diego Diaz coming in at minus 270 going up against Claudio Ribeiro, who comes in at plus 210. Now, Diaz was just minus 210 yesterday, so some clear money coming in on the prospect here, who's on a 6-fight winning streak and did a great job in terms of reintroducing himself to the LFA last time around, where he was able to get a quick victory in that first round. He went up his lone loss with the promotion came 4 years ago when he went up against Carlos Leal, who's obviously now on the UFC roster, but also a very underrated fighter, as Leal was able to knock out Diaz in the first round of their matchup. That started a 2-fight losing streak for Diaz, but he's now spurred on to a 6-fight winning streak and faced some solid competition the entire way. The combined record of the fighters that he's defeated over this 6-fight run is 64-26, which includes a 23-3 fighter, who I believe he was able to finish, and then a former UFC fighter in John Allen, who he had a solid victory over as well. He's a tank of a man that kind of reminds me of Bruno Ferreira. Big power in his hands, but could also smother his opponents with the grappling and really provide a big threat from that top pressure that he provides. He can go 15 minutes, but I think he prefers getting those early stoppages so he doesn't have to dig as deep as he'd have to. He's going up against Claudio Ribeiro, who went 1-3 between 2023 and 2024 with the UFC after earning his contract to the Contender Series. But after back-to-back knockout losses to Roman Kopylov and Christian Leroy Duncan, Ribeiro was cut from the promotion. He won with a 10-second knockout victory over a scrub 8 months after being cut by the UFC, but then dropped a fight to a 24-6 fighter on the Russian regional scene, who landed a nasty spinning back kick to the body that immediately crumpled Ribeiro. Ribeiro is a flashy power striker, and it really seems like he starts to fall off with his effectiveness after that first round, which is why I think all 3 of his losses in the UFC came in the second round. He's explosive, he's fast, but he does not manage his gas tank all that well, and his durability seems to be a big question mark. He's going up against a bigger Diaz here, who I think will do a good job in terms of nullifying the power of Ribeiro, either by commanding the cage with his own power striking, or even looking to wrap up Ribeiro up against the cage, drag him to the ground, and just wear him out from there, maybe even mustering up a finish from that top position. I think Diaz clearly wins this matchup. I think Ribeiro has a shot to pull off a Hail Mary knockout, but I think for the most part, Diaz will be winning the majority of this fight and probably get that finish within a round and a half. And if he doesn't get that call to the Contender Series after that, I don't know what's going on, but a win over a UFC fighter, a recent UFC fighter, is a big feather in his cap. All right. that brings us to the main event of the evening, which is for the interim flyweight title. As current interim flyweight champion, Marcos Degli comes in at -400, going up against Matthias Severino, who comes in at +300. Now, Degli earned his 10th straight victory back in February, where he was able to win the interim flyweight championship, I believe, after defeating Lincoln Santos, I believe the kid's name was. That was a fight where Santos tried to utilize a grapple-heavy approach early, and Degli stuffed it all, and then eventually found that early finish in the second round. And Degli is normally a guy that likes to implement his own grappling style, but in recent fights, we've seen him lean on his hands, and that's allowed him to go out there and finish his opponents. I think his streak is making him seem a lot better than he actually is. I think he's, Lincoln Santos is not a bad fighter by any means, but I think he had a bad game plan in terms of trying to wrestle Degli so desperately early, and I think that caused Santos to slow down, leading to Degli getting that finish in the second round. He's very good with his jiu-jitsu, has some nasty and improving striking game as well, but I think this fight against Severino is going to be tougher than a lot of people are expecting it to be. Severino, I originally came across back in mid-2023 where he went up against Lucas Hocha, who eventually got signed to the UFC, but that was a very close fight. That was very back and forth, and it really came down to certain spots where, Hocha just landed a little bit more damage, but Severino was in that fight the entire time, had some big glimpses of success where he was able to get the back of Hocha, nearly finished him in the first round. He's a good striker, good BJJ specialist, has some good pop on his shots. I believe he's also the brother of former UFC fighter Igor Severino, who was cut from the promotion after biting Andre Lima. But at least Igor is having some solid success over there in Octagon. But I think Matthias is a very overlooked fighter. He's very good combination striking, and I think he can really cause Degli some problems. Enough to the point that I'd be more than happy to take this +300 on Severino. I think his durability is pretty good. Seeing how close of a fight that he had against Lucas Hocha, who I think is a much better fighter than Marcos Degli, leads me to believe that Severino could actually have some success. Maybe outdamage Degli, maybe force Degli to strike longer than Degli was hoping for, and Severino could possibly even have some grappling success of his own. The 5-round nature of this fight makes it a little bit questionable for me. I think Severino took this fight on short notice, but I still think he's more than ready to go out there and show out. So the over 1.5, which is currently sitting at -105, I think that's a good spot because I think this will be a very competitive matchup that will leak into the third and fourth rounds. But I like Severino. I think he is worth a shot here at +300, as I think Degli's just being a little bit overvalued because of that 10-fight winning streak that he's on. But this is going to be a tough test for him. But I'm going to go and new interim flyweight LFA champion Matthias Severino. All right. There you guys go. Just under a half hour on this 14 or 15 fight LFA 212 card. We'll be back tomorrow for Cage Warriors, Legacy Warriors podcast, breaking down that card, which goes down Saturday morning. Reminder, all track plays, all that good stuff can be found on the MMA LOTN Lock of the Night Patreon page. Link for that is in the description below. And I'll see you guys later on today for the Trinity 2-step free parlay for UFC Nashville. See you guys then. Peace.